Hello. We still have a few people logging in, so we're going to give them a minute or two to get settled, and then we'll get underway. Just a few more seconds. Right. So I think we're almost ready to go. All right. So hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. We have over 700 guests today from over 59 countries joining us for the first RCA session talk. Before introducing you to Jeremy and John, please allow me to cover a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar, as you probably see, is being recorded. We will be able to share a link to the recording after the event. And we also invite you to ask questions by using the Q&A button. Most of the questions will be answered during the Q&A portion. Please use the chat button if you have any technical difficulties regarding the webinar. At some point during the session, we will also introduce polls, and you will be able to submit your answers online. Please now join me in welcoming Jeremy and John. I'm going to hand you over to Jeremy, who is going to start today's conversation. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. It's very good to speak to everybody. My name is Jeremy Myerson. I'm the Helen Hamlyn Chair of Design at the Royal College of Art, and I'm hosting the first of our in-session series from the Royal College of Art that will be taking place over the summer, to stay in touch with our network, to talk about design and ecology and innovation, and really start a conversation with designers, people in business, science, technology, and so on, about the key issues of the day. It's my great pleasure to introduce our special guest today, John Thackara. John is a design thinker, writer, curator, event organizer, and probably one of our most important commentators globally about design and the environment. His work sits at the intersection of the man-made world and the natural world, interrogating the balance, or I should say the imbalance, between our industrial systems and our ecological systems. I met John almost 40 years ago when we were together on Design magazine, published by the Design Council, and he is a former research director of the Royal College of Art. He is of our parish, but he's probably best known as the first ever director of the Netherlands Design Institute, and he was also the founder of Doors of Perception, a conference which was an amazing festival of innovation, sustainable innovation, which alternated for many years between the Netherlands and India. John has written many books. Some of you may remember Design After Modernism in the late 1980s. His most recent book is How to Thrive in the New Economy, which is a question we're all asking ourselves right now. And I think what makes John so unusual is that he is unlike a lot of advocates in the green movement. He has embraced the potential of science, technology, and design in order to innovate in a less wasteful and harmful way. And John describes himself as someone who has traveled the world collecting interesting stories about alternative futures. And I'm sure we're going to hear a lot of those stories today. So welcome, John. Great to have you on this webinar. Paint a picture for us. Tell us where you are and where you're living and what you're doing right now.
Well, hi, Jeremy. Hi, everybody. I'm sitting in my office in my house in a small town called Ganges, which is in the south of France. We are on the southern gateway of the Cevennes, which is a very beautiful and very large and very empty part of France, not so well known, but it's a small market town. It's not fancy. We have 4,000 inhabitants from quite a lot of nationalities, but not too many rich northerners, mainly kind of, quote, regular people. And so it has the vitality of a small town where lots of different activities are always happening. To my amazement, I've been here with my Dutch wife, Christy, for 19 years. It's unbelievable. So I guess, and this is for sure, the longest I've been in one place, in my whole life, basically. So this is a surprise I just reminded myself of a few days ago. So insofar as we're all contemplating a world of less movement or different forms of inhabiting our places, I suddenly realized that we've been practicing for quite a long time. So yes, we are 1 hour from a city. The nearest city is Montpellier. We're 3 hours from Barcelona, 2 hours from Marseille. So kind of a Mediterranean culture, a lot of ecological activity in our region, a lot of biodiversity, and yeah, it's a very interesting place. We can talk about that later.
Yeah.
I hope that gives you a bit of a picture about where I am and where I'm talking from.
It does paint a picture. The title of today's session is called The New Geographies of Innovation, and it caused quite a kind of controversy amongst some of our colleagues in the Royal College of Art, because we're at a particular moment in history where perhaps new geographies of innovation may have sounded expansionist or imperialist or even colonial. But it doesn't mean that at all. It's one of your provocations, isn't it?
Well, I'm glad that people have picked up on it and don't let us get away with being sloppy about the words. I mean, I think, as far as I'm concerned, the words new geographies mean, for me, looking to other parts of the world and indeed other times and other cultures and other traditions for inspiration and ideas and partners going forwards that we've had throughout my life. It's a Western focused, Northern focused, capitalist focused world with the many dire consequences that we're experiencing today. But as far as I'm concerned, if we want to think afresh, learn afresh, and do things in a different way that is less damaging to the planet, but also has more solidarity than we've accustomed to, then we have to look to other cultures than our own. So that's kind of my starting point on this notion of new geographies.
So I think new geographies plays very well to the whole idea of being at a pivotal point. I mean, we are right in the middle of the coronavirus crisis. And I suppose for people who've been in the ecological movement, this has been an incredible period. Planes have been taken out of the sky, cars off the road, air quality is improved. People in world cities can see mountains that they'd never seen in their lifetimes from city streets. I mean, on the other hand, there's all kinds of negative connotations and where do you sit? How are you dealing with the pandemic? How have your ideas been kind of tilted or shifted by what's happening?
Well, I've been utterly blindsided like everybody else, although I have getting on for a 30-year history of predicting that things are going to end badly the way we are carrying on. Things have now duly ended badly, but utterly not in a way that I expected or would have anticipated. My own personal position is I've been one of those privileged people who've had a very good lockdown, I have to say. We're in a small town, we have space in our house. I can go, and for 120 days, I've walked along the same riverbank with my dogs in our permitted expedition. And for the first time since I was a child, I've just not moved around as my default daily life. And so it's been like a second childhood for me personally, and my little group here, extraordinary. At the same time, like the rest of us, I've been in daily contact with people who are in radically different circumstances. My friends in Italy, my friends in India, I have friends around the world, many of whom have not had the advantage of being no young children, no small apartment, and so on. So it's a kind of very weird mixture, and I think everybody has versions of secret joy at connecting with your local place for the first time. For me, in 19 years I've been here, I knew nothing about the plants and the trees and the river that I've been learning about, but at the same time saying, what can I do for people who are really having a very bad experience? So it's up and down, and within a day, and this is we're into over 100 days now, every day changes during the day, up and down during the day. It's very, very curious.
There is a curious duality to our experience in all of this. I mean, some commentators have said that the coronavirus has kind of X-rayed society and frozen it at a point and exposed all the inequalities underneath, structural racism, health inequalities, all of these kinds of things. And there is a tendency, I suppose, to, assume we're doomed, and what can designers do, what can technologists do? Where do you see the balance between the negative and the positive?
Well, I have stopped using the word commentator because I think that too many of us, and I have of course been a commenting, sitting apart from sort of telling everybody else what I'm seeing and trying to frame issues and understand questions on other people's behalf. I think we've all stopped doing that. I know I have. I mean, just take the Black Lives Matter experience of the last weeks. I have traveled around the world all my life. I thought I knew a lot about Black lives from just direct experience, but just in 2 weeks, I've just realized that I know nothing about the lived daily lives of people that are kind of surround me and are nearby, simply because I'm not Black, obviously, but also for the first time, people like me, privileged white people, have not been able to hide from what it's like to be scared to go out of your house. I mean, it's not so much the kind of the violence or the stuff that we see visibly. It's the psychological condition of not feeling safe every day of your life, or not knowing if your children go out, not knowing if they're going to come back safely. I have no experience of that at all. And I kind of knew about lots of stuff from traveling, but when you're traveling, you're going over the surface of things. And I think what's frankly wonderful about the whole Black Lives Matter experience of the last weeks is that we've just had little glimpses of a deeper part of the story, people like us, that we were completely ignorant about before. And it opens up a lifetime, as far as I'm concerned. I have so much to learn about things I just did not have a clue about. What, the kind of lived realities of people who are close to me in many cases. I know nothing about that. So we all have to, that's the tipping point for me, is not some revelation of some kind of narrative or political thing. It's just there are so many experiences that I just didn't understand or just didn't get.
Yeah, and that goes right back to our education systems. And I grew up in the city of Liverpool, which was built on the slave trade, but we never learnt Black history in schools. And I think calls now in the UK for the national curriculum in schools to have Black history taught as a mandatory subject, I think are very important. But
I think you could have, I mean, yeah, you could teach things as a subject, and I dare say that'll happen. But in my own experience, it's a bit, the environmental question is the same. You can tell people things all day long, but people only change when they experience things in a different context. So I'm not sure that curriculum development is frankly the answer to either to environmental issues or race issues and what it's like to be Black. I mean, you can have a class about it, but at the end of the day, you remain white. But I just remembered in the last period when I was a child in the north of England, the castles that I kind of would look at like everybody else and say, what an amazing, what happened there and who's in charge of that? Now, many years later, I'm seeing castles on the news, people talking about them, which were built with the proceeds of slavery or colonial brutal activities of one kind or another, which I never knew about. I mean, I'm supposed to be a curious and searching person, but the castle where Dominic Cummings went is, the guy there, he was in charge of putting down the Mau Mau rebellion. I never knew that as a child, and I lived like 10 miles away from that castle. Things like that we just kind of, you need more than curricula to change your understanding. You need what's happening now is kind of real personal connection happening.
I mean, there is the structural inequality and there are the health inequalities. what do you make, John, of our government and governments around the world, saying there's a lot of pent-up consumption that we're going to unleash? Is the answer just to switch the machine back on? I'm not sure it is, but what do you make of that?
They are dreaming, I think. I don't know. I can speak in two ways. One of what I feel, and everybody I know, I don't know anybody who has any pent-up consumption they're waiting to do. Maybe we're kind of, privileged white people, so we don't, but I know. But more to the point, there's been some fantastic sort of proper, scientific surveys the last few days. The New York Times had one yesterday. They interviewed 511 epidemiologists and said, under what circumstances will you get in a plane, go to a restaurant, do all sorts of things? On average, now these are, I would imagine, privileged white people who spend money in there before it all happened. At least half of them said no way, unless there's some sort of cure. So there's no pent-up consumption there. I know for a fact that the travel industry is completely lying and about this impending tidal wave of people wanting to go on holiday. I mean, I know quite a few people in that world. They're just trying to kind of say things, make them come true by, it's like mass marketing, but it's just, they're dreaming. The point is, and this is coming back to what we're here to talk about, all my life I've not understood when I see kind of senior economists on the television talking in hushed terms about, oh my goodness, GDP is going to go down 3%, disaster. And all my life I've said, why does it matter if something goes down 3%? In my life, I often go down 90% and one copes. But the economy, for some reason, can't survive if it goes down by 3%. This, to me, is one of the kind of great, weird unknowns that we've just taken for granted, that we should then say, yes, it is terrible if it goes down 3%, but actually it's very good if it goes down to 3%. It's just that we then have to make sure, in the case of tourism, for example, that the 30 million people who've lost their jobs in tourism, we have to work with them to find them meaningful and good work. We can't just wish they weren't there. But those are two very different subjects from this kind of weird wishing to turn it all back on again. That's not going to happen. And because it's not going to happen, the questions that we're now facing are very different. So
just for a moment, think of what are the positive things that have come out with the economy just being locked down and the industrial machine kind of halted temporarily. Are there positive things that have emerged from this crisis?
Well, I think a lot of people just say very similar things, that how surprised they are that it's the pleasure of getting your food locally and cooking for yourselves and your family in the absence of restaurants and takeaway services and Deliveroo and all that. So a lot of people just very basically say that, which now presents this so-called turning back on the economy. There are like millions upon millions of people who worked in catering and hospitality industries. That is just simply not going to come back because people have discovered a better way of living. So we therefore have to have those conversations. I think that what I said at the beginning about people who are not kind of green, connecting with the natural things around them, is just being transformative for a lot of people. They've told me that. Not just lucky people like me who can go and walk through a forest, but people living in cities who are becoming, weed experts. There are so many websites and kind of apps out there in the last few weeks about weed spotting and welcoming the weed onto your balcony, or being a weed expert about, things that we all just totally ignored, little green things growing through cracks on the pavement. It's become that's a kind of cultural movement, is weed love. And I don't think I certainly didn't anticipate that, but it's great.
I had an online chat with Matthew Taylor, the director of the Royal Society of Arts recently, and he was referencing Rutger Bregman's book, A Hopeful History, in which he said that we need to see the inherent good in people rather than think people as selfish and greedy. And of course the Bregman book had that story of Lord of the the real life Lord of the Flies, where the 6 boys from Tonga survived very well. They were teenagers. They organized themselves very well on the island. They didn't descend into cannibalism. Do you intrinsically, from your experience, see the good in people?
Of course I do.
Yeah.
But I'm no freer than the rest of us from, unless I kind of close my eyes and shut all these machines off.
Yeah.
If I open this computer, I get all sorts of stuff about how terrible things are and how badly people are behaving.
Yeah.
It is, of course, both. It's not. I don't want to come across as being ridiculously naive and privileged. People do bad things to each other all the time. But the default, even in this pandemic, that I've experienced and been told about from people in different parts of the world, is that solidarity, people sharing things, people creatively find ways to help each other. That is the default thing that people have done. So in our little village, there are so many different networks of people looking after each other, which are for the most part kind of pretty invisible. I'll just give you an example. We have a Moroccan neighbor who we asked him about some of the kind of young unemployed people who clearly have no money. And how does that the food get to? Do they go to the food bank or do they go to the town hall to get food? He said, no, we've had systems for sharing food for generations in our cultures, and they're all operating, but they're not visible to you people, he said, in a very charming way.
Yeah.
And so there are networks of solidarity, which completely, and came before and existed before the pandemic, that we just didn't realize were there. And to me, this is one of the reasons why I remain very optimistic, is that we don't have to invent a whole pile of new social systems or welfare systems or whatever from scratch in order to survive. When the kind of state systems disappear, or if they disappear, we can then find things that are already there and improve them.
Yeah.
And that's why designers, I think, have just the most amazing amount of interesting work to do going forward. I mean, I'll give you an example. So that we have a guy that we know near us is a farmer, kind of has a small farming activity, has about, I don't know, 60 or 70 people he sells to regularly. He had to immediately go online. And and anybody in the internet business or anybody watching this, design people say, yeah, fine, just open an internet shop. Easy. It's absolutely not easy if you're a farmer, particularly at this time of year when you have a lot of other things to go to keep your food growing. And there's a huge opportunity there for somebody, actually lots of people, to help farmers tell their story online. And this is a kind of missing kind of layer. So there's some brilliant people out there like the Open Food Network who do the architecture and shops for people to sell food on the kind of the engineering bit and the transactional bit. But when it comes to a farmer having a kind of an engaging film or some photographs or words, somebody has to help them doing that. And there are like millions upon millions of farmers who need our collective help to tell their stories and start those relationships with their customers that weren't there before. Yeah. So that's just one example of a vast opportunity that's opened up.
I'm going to introduce our first poll. There's lots of ways our audience can interact. You can ask questions, and really good questions are already coming in. You can chat and comment. We can see those. And could we have our first poll, please? So that should be coming onto everybody's screens. So this is so after the pandemic. I'm just trying to test the temperature in the room, our big virtual room. After the pandemic, our industrial systems will return to normal. Will snap back to the same old. They'll shift a little, or they'll be transformed. Let's if you could all vote now, please, and submit. Let's see what people say. What did you say, John?
I basically think I would probably click all three. That's the problem with these polls. Yeah. So some things can and will return to normal, but a lot of things will think they're returning to normal but can't. I come back to aviation. So a lot of us in the green world say we have to stop flying, and I'm a total climate criminal because I've been flying all my life. The point about aviation, and I know quite a lot about it, is that it has to expand in terms of its growth by several percent per year in order to survive. The reason being that people need all these airplanes and airports and duty-free shops and all that stuff. All is built on borrowed money as part of expanding the economy. And the money will be paid back by increased traffic, increased passenger numbers, etc., etc. Unless aviation grows, it will be unable to pay back all these mountains of debt that it's accumulated.
It's like a Ponzi scheme.
It is a sort of a Ponzi scheme. The whole of the capitalist global economy is a sort of a Ponzi scheme. And so it's not that they're kind of people, you and I make choices, yes or no, about going on a holiday or flying to again, which I have big questions about. It's that the actual big gigantic pile has to increase 3-5%. Otherwise, the whole thing will deflate like a souffle when you open the door on an oven. And that is something, that is why you get all these, grave and serious people from banks and policy saying, oh my goodness, the GDP will go down. This is fascinating. Okay, so this is our score.
Yeah. So only 5% think it'll return to normal. Nearly 60% think it'll shift a little. And just over a third think it'll be transformed. So we're not too optimistic of radical transformation, but we think there will be some shift.
Well, I have no idea whether we represent anybody in this group, but I think that's rather a surprising result, because I think in my world, a lot of people are saying, oh, we'll all go back to normal, but actually we didn't get that in that little poll. And just to complete what I was saying about, if it's returning to normal, it's not kind of like a lifestyle choice. It is a condition for survival of these big systems. Aviation, the internet, banking, retail, for goodness sake, all the things that are the kind of cornerstones of a consumer-based economy, they have to grow, otherwise they can't survive. So if that poll, which looks a bit familiar to the one in the New York Times and others, is kind of representative, then we are not going to have that. There's no way we're going to go back to 3% GDP growth. It's just, I don't see how that's at all possible. Therefore, through the next years, you're going to see these big chunks of the old economy just degrading or transforming into something else completely.
Well, one of our comments is that designers are practical optimists, which I think is a good definition. Can we come on to one of the big themes of your work, John, which is about the urban-rural reconnection? I mean, most people think innovation and design is about living in cities and doing cool things in cities, but you have been advocating for a very long time a rebalance between the urban and rural. Could you talk a little bit about that and what that means?
Yes, I've advocated without any success whatsoever, it has to be said, but I'll explain why I've advocated it and why it is actually now happening. So basically, I spent 20 odd years trying to understand why it is that so many intelligent people were trashing the planet, our only home, our only life support system, in order for something called the economy to do well. And I kind of met enough of people in charge of things to know they weren't all evil psychopaths at all. They were often, intelligent. Of course, if you're running a big company or a government, you're very intelligent in a way. What I discovered, and I was taught, again, by people from the South and from other cultures, is that we people in the North have no lived connection with the natural world. We live in cities, we live in offices, we live in front of screens. And so this word called the metabolic rift came into my life, 10 years ago. People like Raj Patel and Jason Moore, not so well known, but people who said that the fundamental thing about capitalism is what it does to the way you see the world, as that changes your behavior. We don't see nature, it's happening somewhere else. Therefore, when I started to figure out how to get out of this impasse of getting people to behave in a sustainable way, the notion of reconnecting people living in cities with what's happening in nature and the countryside clearly became very central to the whole subject. Meanwhile, in countries like China and India, which I was visiting, those countries have much bigger rural populations and economies and cultures than we have in Europe. They had the same discussion. How do we rebalance this kind of mad dash to the city, which has kind of driven the economy most of my life? How do we rebalance? Answer, in lots of different ways and with great difficulty. But so the last 3 years, I've just discovered, and that's why I'm so excited about this connection I have with China, is that what we regard as the country which builds whole cities that are empty, or airports or railway stations that nobody needs, they are perfectly well aware of the need to rebalance urban-rural relationships. There are 230 million small farmers in China, for example, who are a big part of not just the population, but of the living economy. So they are just looking very widely at ways, in very practical ways, of connecting city and rural life, not just in terms of transactions, you know, like getting food and so on, but getting people to have longer term relationships with farms or with rural situations. And I have learned basically over this period that telling people in the city that they should think about nature or the countryside is a waste of time. Telling them to leave town and go and live in a yurt or live in a kind of paddy field is equally, they're not going to do it. People have lives, children, networks in cities. But things really come to life when you say, well, would you be interested in some kind of part-time relationship with a farm, with a forest, with a water system, with a community, so that you could be part of two realities rather than just one. And that in the last 3 to 5 years finally has kind of opened the door. And I did this big show in China just before Christmas called Urban Rural, where we put 60, 70 examples in this big dome precisely of that subject. What are the different ways in which urban people and rural people can do stuff together that designers, for example, can improve them, enhance them, and multiply them. Everything from food to biofarms to watershed restoration, earth repair, and so on. And as with all my other work, incredible 90% of what I've discovered is already out there, but just kind of people doing stuff below the radar that city people don't know about. And even me, I'm supposed to be knowing about it. I didn't know about it. It's about going to see things, and these relationships between urban and rural are cropping up everywhere.
Mm. And connected to that is this idea of a new Green Deal. And this has been around a long time. I remember traveling down many years ago to Cornwall when you were doing DOT, which was a festival of sustainability down there. And it was very, very interesting how you were making connections. And there was this talk of a new Green Deal. It cropped up in the last election. It's being talked about now. The way to get ourselves back on our feet is not the old way, but is a new Green Deal. Where do you sit in all of this? And I know you've written about it.
Well, I tell you, I'm rather stressed by it, if the truth be told, Jeremy, because my kind of various timelines are kind of filling up day by day with all these words: Green New Deal, green recovery, healthy recovery. There's something called Build Back Better that started to crop up. And the two things I've discovered is that everybody means something totally different, depending on who they are, about a Green New Deal. And that a lot of people basically think that it involves making large, expensive structures that can employ the construction industry and architects and real estate agents, and that's what they really hope the Green New Deal will be. And governments kind of like that idea because it's like a lot of expense, heavy, expensive, railway stations and so on. But I just don't think we can either afford it or I don't think we want it. And so I think we're right at the moment right now where a lot of people are saying, hey, wait a minute, this is not an excuse to give money to kind of, construction companies. We need to say, what are the softer forms of investment, social infrastructure rather than concrete infrastructure, that we can invest in so that we'll have a better way of organizing our lives going forward. And that's what's happening right now, is that argument about if there is money going to be spent, spend it on people, spend it on ecosystems, spend it on social organization, don't spend it on heavy complicated things. So that's kind of where we are now, and the whole beauty of the situation with the virus and the Black Lives Matter is that the social justice and social care and health become right at the center of the question, with, I must say, perfect timing, because now it's so obvious that the priority for us all is to say, how do we look after each other better? How do we take care of each other's health? How do we help communities do better? And none of these things require large, expensive, heavy things. They require lots of resources and creativity into social forms of organization.
I mean, I'd agree that the care economy is the absolute #1 target. I mean, you know, before Britain went into the pandemic, you know, our politicians were saying we're really well prepared, and we've all seen what's happened. And France, which I admire as a health system, you know, has not fared as badly as the UK, but has struggled and has done worse than other economies around the world. What's your take on how the care system can be transformed? I just want to talk particularly. We've got lots of questions coming in, and there's a phone going in my house, and don't worry, it'll stop in a second. We've had a question in: how does John see the future role of care homes? COVID-19 pandemic has thrown up several issues about care homes during the lockdown, especially the use or lack of use of technology. Share your thoughts on the way forward.
A great question to which I would happily have a 3-hour discussion. I think the notion of care, and so Naomi Klein, who is a brilliant and wonderful person, is having a big announcement today or tomorrow in New York about, let's have a care-based Green New Deal. But again, I just think that we are all suffering from a slight confusion that care has to be somewhere brought back into our lives and then things done to create it when it was missing before. And my basic starting point is that the world has been based on care for thousands of years. People looking after each other, looking after their places, looking after their fields, looking after their animals, whatever. And that it's only in the kind of recent period of capitalism and economy that care has become something, either a product or a service that you pay for, or something which disappears from the picture completely. So I just don't think that there is so much care happening every day of our lives. And what we've seen during the pandemic is that people who were doing that, the caring, poorly paid, you know, professionally paid people, had a really bad deal, which their bad deal became visible for the first time to the rest of us. But more to the point, the need to have the non-professionals and the kind of the family members and the community members, they're all part of the care economy, which already exists. And that therefore the creativity and the investment now is, how do we support and deepen the many, many different kinds of care systems that are already there. 2 examples, and I know a certain amount about care from working about dementia over many years. In Italy, pretty much uniquely in Europe, in the north of Italy, something like 80% of their social care, you know, that is, you know, people going to people's houses, stuff outside institutions. A, there's a lot of it, and B, it all is organized for the most part by cooperatives. Unlike the rest of Europe, where you have these ghastly private companies or big state institutions, individual nurses, doctors, paramedics, very large numbers in Italy work in these cooperatives. That is just something the rest of us in Europe can learn from. But, okay, that's one task. Second task, if care is reduced to spending money on it, then we're never going to get there, wherever there is. We need to find ways to exchange care time and care quality and care experiences, not just by paying for them. And so we have to look at the non-cash economy, the care economy, not as something which you replace GDP with, so many millions spent on social work rather than so many millions on, I don't know, shopping. How do we exchange value on caring by means other than by the state spending money on it or privately doing that? And that is where this whole experiment in China with the social care economy and the software methods of judging people's activities is, I think, can be really transformative. It's got a terribly bad press as being, the end of privacy, Black Mirror, Big Brother, some of which is true. But the point is that all my life, I've talked to people in the care world. They say, somebody with an aging or ailing parent spends 80 hours a month looking after their family member. They're paid zero. How do we help the carers do better? You can't ask the government to pay them all, minimum wage. You can ask them, but you won't succeed. How about society organizing that they have value, so they accumulate social credits through being a carer, and we use software and kind of blockchains, whatever you like, to do that. So I think that's where the technology and the social transformation can meet in the near future.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting illustration. Joe, can we go to our second poll? Because clearly in the Green New Deal, are there opportunities for designers? And I think this is a question we need to ask if we could have the second poll. So the second poll is asking, will the Green New Deal create a new wave of design opportunities, generate limited design interaction? And this is, again, is the relationship between the hard infrastructure and the soft social systems, or leave the design community sidelined? Is this going to go fly over the heads of the design community? So let's everybody vote. Everybody vote and submit. John, what did you go for there? All three again, probably.
No, I think I probably would go for number one. Yeah. But the main difference is that I don't, if you just sit there and wait for things to come to you, then these opportunities probably won't come to you. But I actually think that designers have tremendous opportunities that they have to go and seek out.
Yeah.
I mean, I come back to what I was saying about farmers trying to open online shops, or I don't know, I'll give you another example. So, cargo bikes. So we have this incredible potential right now to get rid of most of the white vans that have wrecked life in our cities, replace them with cargo bikes, and 1 million services enabled by cargo bikes or electric bikes generally. That is not going to happen by itself. Somebody has to design the services and the activities that can be carried out using bikes that otherwise would be carried out by sleazy companies or by people in vans. So that is where designers I think it could be incredible. I don't know. But it's where, and the designers are already quite entrepreneurial. I know that, and I have so many friends who are, filled with the passion of starting up things. I just think that it's starting up social ventures rather than tech ones, where the biggest opportunities are going to be going forward.
Okay, let's have the poll results, please, Joe. Okay. 3/4 of us think there's going to be a new wave of design opportunity. Practical optimists we are.
Very impressive.
Only 6% think we're going to be sidelined as the design community, and I think there's appetite to engage with that. I think that is absolutely.
It's good. Yeah, I don't know how many of them we can't start rewriting polls now, but I'm curious as to how many people think they're going to go out there and create these opportunities or grasp them, versus somebody advertising for these opportunities to be available.
There's some wonderful comments and questions coming in. We're not going to be able to tackle them all, but several of them, John, deal with education, education and training. And I know that you have set up something called X School, which happens in different countries around the world. And you've also been involved in the Bauhaus, rethinking the famous foundation course of the Bauhaus. So
well, I was involved with it in the sense that they had their 100th anniversary and they asked a slightly random group of people if we had any suggestions. So I said that they should have a new foundation course, which frankly, of course, would apply to all of design, based on ecological literacy and ecological design. Which I would like to say that the Bauhaus said, yes, of course we'll do that, but there's been a curious silence since I wrote that. However, I am working with some people in China on a similar project called Ecological Literacy for Designers, where, again, there's a lot of, they're very smart people like we are here, but to some extent have inherited and are still adapting a slightly Western model of design education. So some friends of mine who are involved in this thing called the Ecological Civilization Project, which is, I love these words that they have, saying, well, what does that mean for design education? And we are indeed trying to pilot in different ways not a theoretical course, but how could you give designers an experience of, well, nature and ecology that I've been talking about very quickly so that they could gain a hunger and get started.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a need for change in design schools, and that's happening slowly. But what about learning generally? There's a question here from Dennis O'Brien. Everything is up for grabs post-COVID in the organisation of learning in urban and rural settings. If John was tasked with reconceiving the delivery of learning and schooling, what would he focus on? What would he do first?
Well, thank you, Dennis, for that question. I used to be very filled with great confidence about the world needed to listen to my ideas for education. Then I discovered, like in so many other things, that just because you tell people things doesn't mean to say they listen or even care. So I switched my focus in learning, as in everything else, is saying, well, where are people learning in radically new ways that the rest of us can be inspired by and take bits of? And that, I think, is a much more fruitful approach, I must say. So actually on my website, there's a 2-year-old list now called Wild Learning, slightly random collection of examples from around the world that I was collecting at that moment of people doing design education, but in different ways, outside formal structures, outside, often in buildings with no walls or no buildings at all. It's kind of a bugbear of mine. And that list called Wild Learning was then, and there must be another 100 that I know about since then. Everybody's doing experiments, and I think that it's very healthy that people in design especially are very happy to experiment with new approaches. Most of them will fail, or, you know, my list, half of them have probably died by now, these experiments, but that's fine. It's like biodiversity, lots of experiments. I have no idea what the answer is to the better way of design education. I'm pretty sure there is no one correct model, because the closer each design group is to its local context, the more different its approach will be. Different questions, different people, different kind of issues to explore. So I think we should take the pressure off ourselves and not look for some global model, but say, well, what do we know about our own place? How can we learn more and with other people about that place? What opportunities does that knowledge bring up to us? And then, yeah, take it from there.
There's some very, very interesting comments coming up. I'll just read a couple of them. From Dr. Hina Ali. I have a comment around not seeing a connection with nature in the Western world. I'm from the global South. I think it's quite worse in this area. A huge divide between urban and rural. There are huge barriers in creating these connections. This is from Victoria Leonidou. A very big accident happened in Russia 10 days ago, spilling tons of oil into the Arctic. The accident happened because of the spill created in the tank that was built on newer melting ice that melted. How can people be more aware of these kinds of accidents and how they affect us all? And what is the place of designers in all of that?
Great questions. So there were two aspects to my answer. One is that I think designers have a very big part to play in creating systems of monitoring the health of the world, and lots of different sort of Earth Watch, Earth monitoring. There's a lot of it happening. There's an activity called botanizing, which I learned last week, of apps on your phone which you can point at a beetle or a plant and find out what it is and should it be there. Very large numbers of designers getting involved in projects to restore ecosystems, which involve putting cameras or various sensors in place to monitor things. There are people doing, you know, satellite projects to kind of scan the world at different degrees of precision. So I think that the design world is pretty up to speed on watching stuff. I think the biggest problem is what implies, okay, so you get information, and what do you do with that information? And that is not, frankly, just a design question. So how do we stop Russian oil companies building oil tanks in the wrong place? Not by some design action, but by creating a culture in which you ask the question, is this action of, is this oil tank going to affect the local ecosystem in a good or a bad way? Partly through regulations, but also just everybody thinking about that first and placing that more importantly than maybe the jobs that would come from the oil tank. So, yeah.
I mean, you've talked about, and it's a lovely term, it's very evocative, you've talked about rewilding AI. which is kind of, you know, asking the question of AI that you asked about the internet 25 years ago, when a lot of green campaigners were ignoring digital media and technology and the rise of the internet. You were saying, well, how can this help us? And can digital media offset our wasteful industrial model? Now you're asking the question of AI, how can it support a more sustainable, a more healthy planet? How does that work from your point of view?
Well, this is a very good question, because somebody asked me to give a talk about what can design an AI, and I was already pretty skeptical about it, as you said, Jeremy, because in 1993 we first said, what is the contribution of the internet to sustainability? And the internet people said, we don't care, it's cool, we want to just leave me alone to make my tools. And the green people said, we don't want to talk to these tech people, they're boring and they're just killing the planet. And so since 1993, the problem has been that these two worlds kind of don't naturally work together. But I had another chance in doing a talk just before Christmas about AI, and I discovered a similar thing. There's an incredible amount of attention and energy going into intelligent Earth observation, looking at everything from the health of the soil to the health of plants, from satellites or little tiny sensors and the Internet of Things, and generating vast amounts of data that AI, machine learning, can in one way or another interpret the data. So I think that's happening. You know, Microsoft have a gigantic project. Everybody is jumping onto the AI and ecology bandwagon. But as I've said throughout, it doesn't answer the question, how do you stop the economic system driving people to behave in a way that is, for example, against what the AI things are telling them to do? And that is not a technical question. Not really a design, that's a political, cultural question. So I kind of concluded my exploration, which I must say is ongoing, saying if AI can not just tell us if a forest is sick or healthy or somebody's cutting down a tree, but if AI can remind us every day of our connection to living systems in little ways to kind of raise our consciousness and keep us kind of alert and attentive to living things, then that's a useful thing maybe that AI can do that education or people like me talking about it can't do. So Google Glass for nature. So rather than looking around the city and saying, where can I get a pizza, or where can I get a date, or where can I get a parking place, maybe your Google Glass will say, you know, that tree needs some help, or this pavement should be dug up and replaced with a garden. You know, turn the thing upside down, something like that.
Okay, we're going to go to our third and final poll. The hour is rushing by. We've got so much that we can talk about. Joe, can we have our third and final poll? And this is about the impact of AI in business and society. Will it make our planet healthier? Will there be Google Glass for soil? Will it have little effect on the Earth's health? Or will it cause a series of adverse effects? Will it just help us buy more junk? So let's vote. Let's vote and let's submit, and let's see how practical and optimistic we are as a group. I'll just pick up on a couple of comments. This is from Sean Lund. The example of the Moroccan neighbor that John described could be an example of other people's normal. We need to learn other systems and cultures have been working well without the same values as Western ones. This is from Martha Kellerhouse. Systematic change takes time. Let's hope for radical change, but start with immediate, small and consistent steps. People are always on the threshold of big things. This is from Grit Hartung. Hello, Grit. How do we make networks of solidarity and networks of humanity that are there become more visible? And I think this has been one of the central themes of your question, John, which is the stuff exists, the networks are there, they're just not given priority. Could we have the results of the latest poll? Okay, so this is a lot closer. So 36% think it'll make our planet healthier, 25% think it'll have little effect either way, and 39%, so a slight majority, think it's going to have an adverse effect, that AI is actually going to going to stimulate some of those things. So not quite so positive there, John. We're not quite so optimistic about it.
Well, I'm not sure that I mean, AI, I think it's like everything else. It's going to be all three. So there'll be good and bad things will happen. I think the main thing is just to get out of the habit of mind of thinking that AI is some sort of autonomous development that will do what it does without our participation. AI will do what we tell it to do, so to speak. I mean, it may have degrees of, autonomous behavior, but in general, it's a man-made, human-made thing. But can I go back to what Grit was saying about making solidarity visible? I think this is a great question, which is about the relationship of the local and the global, which I think a lot of design people are nervous about, this local trend being going back to kind of very backward and simple and boring things. I think that there are aspects, for example, if the people in the Moroccan community have a way of looking after each other with food, it's none of our business that it's visible or it should be kind of public if it works. But we can say, well, does it, could there other ways to make it more effective? Could it be on an app? Could it be sharing the food more effectively? Could it be connected to other networks or other solidarity platforms in our region? And that is going to be case by case. I don't think we can make rules about it. But therefore, you'll have my vision or my observation of global and local is that you have very specific local activities that are unique to their place, that have qualities and features that we could learn from somewhere else. I mean, in Italy, they have this brilliant movement called VASAP, which is a kind of meeting format, basically, in which farmers, mainly in the south of Italy, meet and talk about things that are interesting, bugging, or opportunities that they want to talk about. It's like some hay bales and some wine. But the point is, there's something about the quality of that social creativity that it's very popular and widespread. So we are not going to become like Italian farmers in the south of Italy, but we can look at the kind of way they design their meetings and design their websites and design their invitations and design their language and design their use of music and say, this is, we can do our meetings much better. So the global bit is aspects of the platform, if you like, and then the local bit is the content. So it's not a choice between the two.
Right. I mean, there's lots of wonderful comments here. I particularly like this one. This is from Les Fayons. Is there in reciprocity, as happens in nature, something to explore with creativity? So can we use creative means to replicate the reciprocal aspects of nature?
Totally. I think that, for me, that is one of the keys to unlocking the kind of death grip of the current economy, or this notion of everything has to be economy and money, is looking at sharing value in new ways. That nature is one way, but things like community supported agriculture, crowd farming, share farming, with the ways the grain kind of collaboratives, bread movement. There's lots of it, and the social care and looking after each other. I think there's a lot of examples, and if design people can come and say, this is great that there's a social care collaborative in Italy, but surely we can organize it better. Surely the interface, surely the whatever. There is so much potential there. So it's a good question. I think it's at the center of it.
And this is from Michelle Morrison, connected to that. What are your thoughts on a universal basic income?
Yes, please. I would like some of this.
Freeing up valuable social, communal, and environmental engagement time. I
think it's, I'm totally not an expert on that subject, but I just like the sound of it because, we're all, yes, I'm in favor of it. I presume it's already started in Spain and Finland, different experiments. I imagine it'll take different forms in different places, but in principle, yes, it has to be a good idea.
Yeah. And this is from Rosalind Wyatt. What do you consider the role of traditional craft going ahead, this reconnection with textile?
Nice. I just think that we are on the peak of digital everything and going back to a mixed world of analog and digital, and that everything to do with materiality, making stuff, embodied experiences, the qualities of touch and smell, as well as what things look like. That is where we add quality to our lives going forwards. So craft is at the center of that whole story. It's also at the center of where design is coming from. So I think it's, I mean, we all know this group, how fantastic is the craft tradition, for example, of the UK, but around the world, it's no longer a cute thing about souvenirs and small villages. It's going to be central to everything.
The hour is nearly up, John. We've raced through a whole range of subjects, and we could, I'm sure with our audience, we could do this for several hours. But I just want to ask, you know, if people want to learn more about your ideas, how can they engage with you? What can they read?
They can buy my book, which is only €2, thanks to the beautiful people at Thames and Hudson, for the pandemic special offer, How to Thrive in the Next Economy. I have a website called Thackara.com with a ton of stuff on it. I spend too much time on Twitter and a bit of time on Instagram. So like everybody here, I jump around in channels trying to say, how can I have a calmer life? But basically drop me a line, and my basic job is not to be the source of answers, but to be a starter of conversation. So if there's something I can do about like that, yeah, let's get in touch.
Well, I think a starter of conversations is a very good way of describing your role, which has been very important over many years. John, it's been a great pleasure to catch up with you, to talk to you, to have the opportunity to share ideas at what is a really pivotal moment, not just for design and designers, but for how we organize our industrial systems and our natural systems. John, thank you very, very much for sharing today. There's a lot of wonderful comments that I hope can be shared right across our global audience today. And there are a lot of links. People have said, look at this, look at that. I hope that we can share that. One of the purposes of the Royal College of Art's In Session series is to really open a new debate about where art, design, creativity and technology go from here. It's a key moment, and I think that as our first speaker in this series, I think you've really opened the door to a whole range of possibilities. So I'm going to say thank you to John. I'm going to say goodbye to everybody, and I'm going to hand you back to Joe.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, John. Thank you to everyone who joined us for today's in-session talk, and great insights. If you have any additional questions or would like to connect directly with the executive education team and the speakers, you can reach out directly on innovation-education@rca.ac.uk, or you can reach out via social media at RCA Short Courses on Twitter and Instagram. Make sure to check our webpage for upcoming events on the link that I have put in the chat for everyone to see. And I would like to invite everyone to tune in to our next in-session talk on the 18th of June about open sourcing leadership with the RCA's Rama Yerawu and Google's Christopher Patno. Find information on how to register for this event on the RCA events page as well. Thank you everybody for your time. Have a wonderful rest of your day and hope to see you again next week. Goodbye, everybody.